best practices for recruitment and retention. Been working with the group on this. We'll get into that in just a second. People always ask me, what's the solution? Do you have it? Nope. There's no one solution to this issue. We're going to go through that. Hit the green button. All right. The last thing we saw in the Keen presentation was a QR code. I need everybody to now show that they know how to use a QR code. Get your phones out, take a picture of the QR code. It's going to take you to a Mentimeter survey that we're going to use for part of this presentation. We're going to ask a few questions, make the presentation interactive. At the same point, it gives you an excuse to look at your phone and pretend like you're still paying attention. And finally, at the end of this, we're going to ask a few questions to gather information that will be part of the study that we're using. We figure while we had this many people in the room, we should take advantage of that. Everybody got it? And so now I get to figure out if the red button goes back, and it does. All right, you've got about 5 seconds to get it, and I'm going to give up on you if you don't have it by then. The people in the back, is it scanning? I was told it would, so I was told correctly. All right, the study advisory committee that we have, you can see the people that are on the advisory committee there. We've had a lot of good input from this group. I'm going to skip on to the study motivation. Why are we doing this? Why are we looking at recruitment and retention at the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet? A 54% decline in staff from 75 to 2021. Are you all doing less projects? Doing less work? No? Okay, well, so that doesn't quite add up, does it? This was a staggering number to me. 433 engineers and highway technicians lost since 2019 to 2021. That does not include this year. That's through 2021. At the same time, do you want most of your people, your engineers, your technicians, to come in with some type of education when they start the job? It's generally pretty advisable. We just saw the Keen presentation. We're trying to get people invested in engineering and doing Department of Highway work. There's been nearly a 300% increase in UK's annual tuition in 20 years. That means the people that you're recruiting, that you're trying to get to come and work at the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, are paying 3 times what they were for education just 20 years ago. When you put more in, when you invest more in something, what do you expect out of it? More in return. That's exactly right. At the same time, there's been I like this statistic, 40.5%, this doesn't include this year. What's inflation been the last year? Right at 10%. Is anybody feeling that? Just a few people here are feeling it. It's all, maybe we don't need to make adjustments. A 40% loss in the dollar's purchasing power over the past 20 years. Jason, you'll be proud of me. I worked this into the presentation. Has everybody in the room seen this? Yes, everybody has seen the mission and vision. Has everybody seen the strategic goals? Everybody take a minute and look at the strategic goals. See if there's at least one of these strategic goals that you assist with. If there's not, let leadership know. I'm sure Jason will find a way to redirect toward the right strategic goal. Who's responsible for carrying out the Cabinet strategic plan and fulfilling its goals? All right, on your screen right now, you should see where you can fill out a questionnaire. There's multiple choices on who is responsible for carrying out the Cabinet strategic plan and fulfilling its goals. Your choices are the Secretary, the State Highway Engineer's Office, the Chief District Engineers, or every person who works at the Cabinet. Well, this one seems to be a pretty easy one. All right, you're following the path so far. All right, in 2 to 3 words, describe major challenges associated with meeting the goals in the Cabinet strategic plan. No filthy language. We do not have a filter on this, so don't test us. So we're getting a few words in there. Staffing, funding, time, budget, staffing, communication, lots of different things, but I am seeing the staffing show up on quite a few of these. So, the recruitment and retention, this presentation that you're sitting in right now, if you're not listening, are you missing something? Do recruitment and retention play an important role in the cabinet's effort to carry out its strategic plan and meet its goals? Well, I've got at least 118 people paying attention, right? So that's pretty good. No. So I remember one time, I'm going to tell a story here. Gary, you're going to get called out in every presentation today, I guess. We had done project management boot camp. How many people in here participated in a project management boot camp? A lot of hands, a lot of hands. How many people thought going through project management boot camp had at least one thing that related to their job? Raise your hands again. All right, we got to the end of one of these. We do an evaluation at the end of every one of these, if you'll remember. And we got to the end of one of these, and we're going through the evaluations, and there was a question. Did this help you learn how to better do your job at the cabinet with regard to project development, or did it address the issues? And we got a couple people that said no, and Gary said, well, we ought to just kick them right out of the room. Well, it was the truth. That's the way this recruitment and retention is. This relies with, it helps what you're doing to meet the goals of the cabinet. So 5 people, maybe recruitment and retention don't matter. I don't know to them. All right, the project objectives. What were we trying to do? What are we trying to do? This is an active project. We're at the end of year 1, moving into year 2 now. We've got a to-do list for year 2. But identify strategies the cabinet can use to build on the agency's existing strengths to attract and retain talented people. Number 2, evaluate the utility of alternative hiring methods, variable work schedules, and remote work opportunities. How many people have taken advantage of the remote working opportunities over the past 3 years? How many people now consider that to be an important part of your job or a benefit of your job? Document and synthesize recruitment and retention strategies adopted by other state transportation agencies. We're looking at what some of those were doing. I was fortunate enough to be at a RAC conference, Research Advisory Council conference in Massachusetts with Jared Stanley about a month ago. And the secretary of the DOT there was up and speaking. And guess what their number 1 issue is? Recruitment and retention. You hear it time and time across the nation that that's the number 1 issue. One of the things he said, though, that was really interesting is all we're really doing is stealing from each other right now. Can anybody relate to that? Is that how positions move? That's what we're seeing more and more in transportation, whether it be the technicians that we use, the engineers that we use, any management that we use, the maintenance people that we use. We're just stealing from the same pool. How do we expand that pool? How do we get more people into the transportation area? So that's one of the things we're going to talk about as well. I'm not going to read this one to you. I don't just stand and read slides, but I do want you to take a minute to look at it. This is not the first group to struggle with recruitment and retention. How many of you think that you're the first person to ever struggle with this? This is something that the cabinet has struggled with for a long time, but the world has changed. The retirement benefit that has been lost to those of you that stood up or with 10 or more years experience, a different retirement system, especially the ones with 20 plus years experience, that is a real factor right now. The job market's tight right now. That's the world we live in. Corporations are better to quicker adjust to the salary scales that government entities are able to do. We're even struggling with that at UK. So those are some of the realities that we have to face. With that in mind, we're going to talk about, the first thing we're going to talk about salary. That's Dr. Gibson's going to talk about the salary work that we've done, the comparisons that we've done. There's no getting around the fact that we need to look at some of those things. And then Dr. VanDyke, Kreis, is going to talk about some of the other things that influence whether people want to stay with you, whether they want to move on to a different position, how to best get folks in the door from the time they leave college. So we're going to talk about a few of those things. So, Bryan, I think we're up to you with the salary.
I think Doug did a pretty good job of laying out why we're doing this study and some of the things that we're going to be looking at. One of the first things that we did was to look at salaries. That's obviously part of the picture. Chris is going to talk about some things beyond compensation. But the first thing we did want to do was look at salaries. Before we even get to comparing salaries with your peer agencies in the private sector, we wanted to look at salaries and the impact of inflation and raises over the last 22 years. So what we did was we took just some sample salaries. That first column is a salary, say in 2000. The second column is that same salary adjusted for inflation in 2022. So that includes significant inflation we've been seeing over the past year, year and a half. The third column is that same salary from the first column adjusted for the increments that you all have received over those last 22 years. And it does include the 8% this past year. I don't see, did that matter to anybody? Was that a good thing? I think so. And then the difference between that inflation adjusted salary and the actual KYTC salary. So as you get to higher salary levels, you can start to see it adds up. 8% made a difference, but I think another 8% and another 8%, you start to add those, we start to make a difference there. That was one of the first things we wanted to look at. From there, we looked at a couple of salary surveys. AASHTO, if y'all are familiar with this, puts out one every year. The most recent was released in 2021, fall of 2021. The data is from 2020, so keep that in mind when we look at these. There should be another release coming, probably another month or two, so we'll have a better idea as to salaries in 2021. There's a lag from their data collection to when they actually publish it. It's a pretty good way to compare job classifications. We're going to look at some high-level stuff. We have a lot of the details. We're going to look at some midpoints and see how those stack up, both with your peer agencies, our neighbors, as well as nationally. We also looked at the ASCE survey. They do a salary report as well, look at private sector salaries. That most recent release was also in fall of 21, but that data was collected in spring of 21, so it's a little more recent than the AASHTO numbers. As we already mentioned, you all got an 8% raise. There's additional funding, as you probably know, for potential 12% next year, and that's contingent on that personnel cabinet study and what the outcome of that is. So what we're going to look at over the next few slides are a set of job classifications. This is pretty cut and dried. Salaries, they are what's been reported. It is what it is. We're going to look at those. These are all midpoints. That seemed to be a good place to look versus trying to look at the min, the max, and everything in between. So these are all midpoints. This first slide is non-supervisory engineering positions. You can see them there, the positions across the bottom. The cabinet, you can see those are in kind of a pinkish color. Also went ahead and added the 8%. So that's that second column in each of those categories, kind of a purple color. The blue color is the regional average. So those are all of our neighboring states. And then the national average in black. Generally, we felt like looking at our neighbors, those are probably agencies we're competing against more than perhaps nationally. So looking at some of those, it becomes pretty obvious that the cabinet's kind of behind the curve on some of these. Moving on to some of the supervisory engineering positions, you can see the labels across the bottom there. Same setup, cabinet plus 8%, regional average, national average. The 8% helps, but when you look at what our neighbors are doing, they're not standing still either. Tennessee has offered over last year 4.5% to 6%, depending on position. West Virginia 5%. Ohio's doing 9% over 3 years. Indiana's doing 5%. So 8% helps, but when you start adding to those regional numbers, it closes the gap a little bit, but maybe not as much as we'd like to see. This slide is the engineering technologist position classifications. This is a slightly different picture than those first two that we looked at. If you look at the technologist 1 and 2 classifications, the cabinet is equivalent to, if not slightly exceeding, our neighbors for these positions. However, when you get to the supervisor position, that lags behind by nearly $15,000. So as you get towards more responsibility, the salaries start to fall behind a bit there. The maintenance series, KYTC's midpoint salaries for a Tech 1 and 2 are, again, either equivalent or maybe slightly lower than peer agencies. Typical differences here would be around 2,000 to 3,000 or so. For equipment operators, the midpoint salaries are close to the equivalent or slightly less, again, around $2,000 to $3,000 than peer agencies. Again, when you get to those superintendent, supervisory level positions, the differences are going to be more pronounced. Salaries anywhere from $13,000 to $26,000 less than peer agencies. Again, we're going to look at the new release this fall and see what it looks like compared to this, but I would wager it'd probably be similar. When we get to the private sector, salaries in the private sector usually outpace what's attainable at transportation agencies. If you look at this, somebody fresh out of college with a bachelor's degree in the private sector can expect to earn around $65,000. I think we've heard salaries above that even, fresh out of school. It's problematic when it comes to recruiting young folks. One of the first things they look at is salary. The cabinet has a lot of other things to offer. I think Doug's going to touch on some of those at the end, but do we sell those enough? So of course, salary is not the only factor. I just look at the data. This is what it is. If you want to look at look at this in more detail, we have that documentation. We wanted to touch on some of the midpoints here just to give you an idea of what we looked at as far as this goes. But of course, salary is not the only factor. So I'll turn it over to Chris now to talk about a few things beyond compensation.
So yeah, what we want to do now is think a little bit beyond just salaries about what other push and pull factors might influence recruitment and retention at state DOTs. And what you're going to see on the next few slides mostly comes from a synthesis of research that's been published over the past 10 to 15 years on recruitment and retention at state DOTs. As you can imagine, there's been a pretty rapid explosion in research in this area over that time, with about 15 to 20 studies being published. So I thought it might be useful to work backwards and start with talking about why people report leaving jobs at DOTs. Of course, money is a consideration, but there are a number of other factors. Staff get frustrated when they lack clarity about job responsibilities and face increasing job demands. Often this lack of transparency isn't intentional on the part of agencies, but is just a natural consequence and outgrowth of agencies having to fill roles when people leave. And of course, these issues can be exacerbated by problems such as too little training. Staff want to feel like they're able to grow and have training and advancement opportunities available to them. So when those aren't readily available, they may factor into decisions about looking for opportunities outside of agency employment. So this brings us to the first of 3 poll questions in my segment, which is, we just want to get a better feel for what's happening at KYTC. And what we want you to do is think about your experiences, about people who have left recently, and even why you might have considered leaving at one point or another. What factors do you think are most responsible for people taking jobs elsewhere. So I feel like we see a lot of the themes popping up that were identified by previous researchers. Of course, salary and compensation, but also, let's see, telecommuting, support, incentives, job opportunities, benefits, looking for better culture, and let's see, give you guys one more second to get your answers in before I move on. Advancement, promotions, 401k, health insurance. So jumping forward into how agencies can recruit staff, you're going to see a couple of pieces of information on this slide and the next slide. To the right, you see a list of strategies, and to the left, a level of difficulty. And that just refers to how challenging it might be to get a strategy into place, up and running at the cabinet. Now, we developed these rankings with the assistance of cabinet personnel. We asked them to rank the level of difficulty on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is the easiest, pretty easy to get into place, and 5 is exceedingly difficult, perhaps broaching on the impossible. We don't necessarily regard this as the final word on level of difficulty, but it provides a good starting point, and it's also important to note that KYTC is already doing some of these. So the low difficulty strategies, those that fall into 1, 1.52, tend to be clustered in a few areas. Several deal with job postings, so you want to work in content related to benefits, value of public service, also mention potential for advancement and promotional opportunities. Also important is strengthening outreach to primary, secondary, and post-secondary schools to try and ignite, as we saw earlier, students' interest in engineering and transportation more generally. Expanding the availability of internships, career pathways, and educational assistance is also critical. But as you might guess, more challenging to get into place are strategies that involve issues such as shortening the hiring process, different forms of add-on compensation, and loosening experience requirements for different positions. And this can be especially problematic for job series that exist across multiple cabinets. So what I've done with this slide is I tried to distill some of the themes from the previous slide into a more manageable number of answers. So of the strategies that you see listed up here, which 2 to 3, it's multiple choice, so you can pick as many as you want, do you think would be most effective for attracting new talent? So it looks like the leaders are simplifying and shortening the hiring process, which isn't too surprising, and then also offer financial incentives such as signing bonuses and relocation allowances, followed by, let's see, emphasizing stability and benefits of public employment and student loan relief and/or provide educational allowances. So definitely oriented more toward compensation, but kind of interesting that the leading vote getter is trying to shorten up that hiring process. So I'm going to wrap up with retention strategies, and not surprisingly, you'll notice that a lot of the strategies on this slide align pretty well with what we just saw on the recruitment side. And that's pretty understandable given that recruitment and retention are pretty intertwined. And keeping people once they're on board is going to require agencies to deliver on the promises, accommodations, and benefits that feature prominently in the recruitment phase. Again, we followed the same procedure for ranking the level of difficulty of getting new strategies implemented. And at least on the retention side, most of the ideas are a little bit less challenging to adopt. Some of the key ones include building an open and inclusive working environment, giving people a chance to work on cross-disciplinary projects across the cabinet, trying to expand and strengthen those formal and informal mentoring opportunities, and then also improving how knowledge is managed and communicated across the agency. One important thing as well is trying to make sure that flexible work policies are implemented fairly and consistently across the cabinet, and emphasize as well that where possible, try to extend those opportunities to technical staff as well. And then, as you might imagine, some of the more difficult strategies to implement relate to compensation and will prove a bit thornier just because decisions about those issues often go beyond the discretion of KYTC. So this brings us to the final poll question of my segment, which is, which of the strategies that you see listed on your screen do you think are going to be most effective for helping people to remain at the cabinet over the long term? Again, it's multiple choice, pick 2 to 3, or 1, whatever you're feeling. And not too surprisingly, improved compensation is the leading vote getter by nearly a 2-to-1 margin. Let's see, followed by consistent application of remote and flexible work policies, and using objective criteria when making decisions about awarding promotions. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Doug.
Thank you, Chris. Thought it was interesting. One of the things that came up was the amount of time it takes to hire somebody. And while we were having some of these committee meetings early on, Denitra, I think you said, I can't hire anybody. It don't matter what we can pay right now. It takes 9 months to get somebody on board. People don't have that long to make decisions. So that certainly comes to light here. And then compensation, you saw the charts that Bryan pulled together on compensation and where we're at right now. How many people believe that the cabinet will ever be able to pay, or any government agency will be able to pay all of what private industry pays? All right, nobody's hands went up. So that's good. That's not the world that we're in. But we do have to make up some ground. Leadership is aware of that. Mike and James have been involved in these discussions. I do believe this administration is trying to do what they can. So they know that that's an issue. Let's talk about some of the research tasks that we're going to do in 2023. Surveys and our interviews with cabinet staff. Some of you will be asked to participate in some one-on-one interviews, group sessions that are going to come up over the next year, especially to discuss retention, discuss some of the things that Bryan and Chris just walked us through. In-person interviews with fourth-year students, particularly the engineering students and recent graduates, to find out why they made the decision that they did, whether it's to come to the cabinet, whether it's to not come to the cabinet, especially those that were on the scholarship program, what informed their decisions. Potential surveys with staff who left the cabinet over the past 3 to 5 years to find out what their decision-making process was, report on staffing challenges, current cabinet initiatives, and other state approaches to recruitment and retention, prioritize recruitment and retention strategies, and then requests submitted by the SAC and cabinet leadership. So we've got quite a few activities that we're going to be doing over the next year. One of the things we're doing as the transportation center at the national level, about every 5 or 6 years, there's a call for university transportation centers. We kind of went out on a wing this year and are putting one in to actually look at recruitment and retention for all DOTs, all state transportation agencies, to determine what the best practices are and how we may be able to help at a national level. It's not just Kentucky that's struggling with this right now. Salary matters. We all know that. I don't know what the magic, in my mind, somewhere in the 80 to 85% range of what the averages are. It's what the cabinet should be striving for, because there's a lot of other things you all have to offer. As you're talking to the people that could potentially be coming to the cabinet, as you're trying to recruit, as you're trying to retain the people you have, don't say, oh, well, we can't pay enough, I guess we lose. Well, that doesn't help any. Some of the good things that the cabinet has going for them: job security, well-defined work weeks. What I mean, a lot of you all do work weekends. I know that. But the schedule is from 8 to 4:30, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 o'clock, depending on the job classification that you're in. There is some benefit to knowing what your work schedule is. Benefits of public service. For my generation, I'm not sure it was such a bit. Well, maybe it was. At the transportation center, I've been lucky enough to be able to hire some of the people that retired from the cabinet. We've got a lot of really excellent people in David Moses, but yeah, but it amazes me, the thing that all these people have in common is the love that they have for the cabinet. Jeff, I think if we cut you right now, you bleed black and yellow, even after being away for 8 years. It's unbelievable. John, I see you smiling up here. You're the same way. I mean, these folks love the cabinet. There's something to that public service and getting to do that. Ability to make decisions that change people's lives. You all get to do that. You're making decisions that, all right, over the next 2 days, there's going to be a world of consultants coming in here tonight, making good money, blah, blah, blah. Guess who makes the decisions? You do. Guess who gets to tell me and Bryan and Kreis what to do at work? You guys do. You get to make decisions the rest of us live with and try to figure out. We try to give you options, but you all get to make the decision at the end of the day. It's a big deal. I really emphasize on that because I'm not sure a lot of you all realize how big of a deal that is. You get to decide, here's what we're doing, move forward, let's do it, get us some help. The chance to work on projects throughout the state. I think the cabinet has done better at letting people live where they need to live. I know, good grief, I have to do the math in my head. 35 years ago, if you had told me that I could go through college and then come out and graduate and go work in Whitley County, that's probably the route I would have taken. So take advantage of that. If you have somebody that's a good engineer, a good technician, but they need to live in a certain region of the state, try to work with them to be able to do that. Advancement opportunities. There are advancement. I saw one of the things. There are advancement opportunities at the cabinet, especially in this day and age. I look around. Jason, I'm going to pick on you again. Brad, Denitra. Younger people are in high level positions now. That wasn't the case years ago. There are advancement opportunities that were not there before. There's just no denying that. Potential to work across disciplines on a variety of topics. I would venture to say if you're starting your career at the cabinet and you have something that you're interested in and you know that you're interested in, go talk to your supervisor. See if that's something. You get to try a lot of different things at the cabinet. There's going to be something that's probably going to help you find a career that you're happy with. Ability to work remotely. I saw some comments up there on that. I saw a meeting, the University of Auburn. I saw where they told everybody come back to the office. That's all. Did you know that, Bryan? Happened last week. Bryan's went to Auburn. That's the reason I just connected the dots on that. but told everybody back to the office all the time, every day. You think Auburn's going to struggle to keep their people? No? Yeah, I hear one yes. So one person in here values remote work. I am. Jason knows how I work. Recognize this is important. Recognize other organizations. Do they recruit your people? In case you don't know, the next 2 evenings, some people in here are going to be recruited. Y'all not know that? That you're fighting this fight. Partnering conference is wonderful. We learn lots of information, learn about what's going on at the cabinet. It's a chance to come together. It's also the prime time event for consultants to come and talk to your people. Keep that in mind. Requesting new staff. I hear this all the time. I need staff. I need staff. Why do you need staff? Don't just continually complain about not having enough staff. Tell me the reasons that you need staff. People are much more likely to listen to you if you say, well, I need 3 additional staff, or I can't meet strategic goal, whichever one you want to point out. What specifically can you not do if you don't have the additional staff? Whenever possible, like I said, the love that a lot of you folks have for the cabinet is just unbelievable. Serve as a relentless advocate for the cabinet. Sell what you can. Hopefully the salaries will be addressed. We don't get to make these decisions. I think if Mike and James were standing here, they're fighting for you. Guess what? They've got to fight. They can't just sign over and say everybody gets a salary raise. There's things that they're working on it, but I don't know where it's headed. The 8 and 12, how many people think that was an accident? We got at least 2 people in here that think that was a complete accident. There's advocates that are working for you right now. So I guess that was we had one more, I thought we had one more slide, Brian. Did I go right past it? All right. Brad, I'm going to throw this thing in just a minute. All right, there's supposed to be a slide coming up that has a QR code for some questions on the recruitment and retention study. It'll take you about 5 or 10 minutes to go through it. We will try to get that up on the screen. Don't go through it now, but if you have time tonight, if you're standing around the reception and nobody will talk to you, if you get back later this afternoon and have a few minutes in the hotel room, sometime during the conference, if you could take just a few minutes. Oh, Paul got it for us. Thank you, Paul. If you could scan that, it should take you to a survey that we would like to have everybody here complete. Gives you a chance to offer your input, and we'll be around the conference the next 3 days. If you have any questions on recruitment and retention and what we're doing, feel free to come and ask us about it. We advise the cabinet. We are finding what's out there. We're trying to help with the information. Ultimately, it's up to the cabinet to decide which steps they want to. Guess who makes the decision? All right, go to slide 1. Apparently, we're starting this all over again. All right. Thank you all for your time. That's all we have on recruitment and retention for the moment.